Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nathan Ritz with the Greater Des Moines Partnership. As always, I want to thank you for taking an hour out of your day and your lunch hour for most of you to spend some time with us learning about workforce inclusion topics. Today we have Easter Seals with us, and they will be presenting on invisible disabilities and caregivers in the workplace. Before we dig into that content, just a couple of housekeeping items. This is a listen-only seminar, so if you do have questions, you can go ahead and use the chat option, or you could raise your hand and I'll direct chat with you. My name in the system is Megan, so if you do see that, I'm using my colleague's login. So just in case if you get some confusion there, it is Meg Schneider. So, but actually my name is Nathan Ritz. So no confusion there, but we'll go ahead and get started. So we have Becky Pospisil here. She is the Chief Compliance Officer at Easter Seals, Iowa. After graduating from Central College in 2004, Becky has held a variety of positions in the nonprofit world, including Director of Quality Assurance, Director of Quality Improvement, and Director of Adult Day Services. During her 11 years at Easter Seals, Becky has had the pleasure of creating new innovating programming and leading her teams to Program of the Year and acceptance of 2 staff awards for leadership. Currently in her role, Becky provides guidance to the agency in regards to human resources, quality improvement activities, accreditation standards, recruitment, and retention efforts for overall agency best practices. Outside of day-to-day, Becky uses her time to represent Easter Seals at various community events. She served as the board president of the Polk County Positive Behavior Support Network, a unique training and networking initiative that includes 15 other disability nonprofit providers as members. She's a proud member of Central Iowa SHRM. Becky lives in Clive with her husband and 3 children and enjoys traveling, going to concerts, and the outdoors. I would also like to throw in here that Easter Seals is the current holder of the Greater Des Moines Partnership's Small to Medium-Sized Business Inclusion Award. So that is something that we'll be awarding again at the end of 2017, so be looking forward to that. And definitely we have a lot to learn from Easter Seals as a pace-setting organization within our community. With that, I'll hand it over to Becky.
Well, thanks, Nathan. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about disabilities in the workplace and oftentimes how they are invisible to the eye, but could be occurring with your workforce. We're also going to talk about a new hot topic that's becoming more common, especially in the state of Iowa as our population is aging, and that would be caregivers who are part of your workforce as well. So a couple of things that we're going to go over today, just our short agenda. You can go ahead and switch. Thanks so much. These are the things we're going to go over today in this webinar. We're going to talk about some invisible disabilities that might be common in your workplace. We're going to talk about hiring people with disabilities or caregivers of somebody with a disability and how you can create an inclusive environment for them. Some tips for some of the common disabilities that you might see, how you can better accommodate your work setting to be successful for them. And then I'll have some resources available for you at the end of the webinar. So first thing we're going to talk about seems kind of silly, but what is a disability? I think a lot of us think of the obvious disabilities that you can see, like somebody utilizing a wheelchair or somebody using a seeing eye dog or a cane for walking. But really it goes much beyond that. The Americans with Disability Act was passed in 1990 and then upgraded in 2008 to really define it so that it was clear to employers so they could have a better understanding of what is considered a disability, especially for their workforce. So you can see that a person with a disability is defined if they have a mental or physical impairment that significantly limits one or more of their life areas. And like I said before, oftentimes these disabilities aren't visible to the eye, but could be occurring and causing maybe work performance issues for your team members. And we're going to talk about some things that you can do to address that. So a life event seems pretty silly, but here's a list of what the ADA really defines as a life event that could be affected by a disability. So being able to care for yourself without the assistance of others, performing manual tasks or working, seeing or hearing, eating, sleeping, breathing, walking, standing, lifting, bending, and so on and so on. These are all things that we do all day, every day. We don't think about them because it's a natural part of how we move and how we live. But if you acquire a disability or have somebody in your workforce that discloses a disability, these can be those life events that are challenging for them. Again, part of your daily life, you don't think about it too much, but of course, if one of these things were to go away, your inability to take care of yourself, your inability to walk or stand, it would really affect your work life as long as and your personal life as well. So we're going to talk about some things that you can do at work, some accommodations that are available, some technology that's out there that can make a work environment more inclusive for those people. So here's a not all-encompassing list, but a pretty hefty list of invisible disabilities of people that people may have that are part of your workforce or just part of your community. And you can see there's a pretty long list. I'm going to highlight a couple of these and go over them. One of the biggest disabilities and a hot topic in media right now is mental illness. And there's a variety of mental illnesses that people can be diagnosed with and they can still be working and living alongside you and me. Some of the most common ones you may see would be like depression, anxiety disorders, impulsive disorders, bipolar disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And these are very common because on the outside the person looks healthy, but day to day their mental health can change. And this can be very common in the workplace. You might see trends, performance issues or disciplinary action with people who may be living with a mental illness. And so those are one of those invisible disabilities that you may have. Another could be somebody that's living on the autism spectrum. And I know a lot of people think of autism, you think of that very typical nonverbal, might need a lot of assistance, isn't able to communicate well, but really autism is a huge umbrella of diagnoses. One of which can be just socialization. And many people that have an Asperger's diagnosis or a form of autism, they may struggle with making friends, making eye contact, having appropriate conversations, having just normal day-to-day regular conversation that you would have with somebody that doesn't have autism. So that's becoming more common in the workplace as well. Another one could be a spinal cord injury. Now, this is kind of a funny one because a lot of times somebody that does have a spinal cord injury would utilize a wheelchair. But there are people that are suffering from back pain, and that would be considered a disability. It can really inhibit their quality of life. Next would be a brain injury. And there's all different types of brain injuries. You can acquire a brain injury through an accident or an injury. Now, it can also happen through illness as well. Sometimes with brain injury, again, the person appears on the outside to be very typical, but they may have issues or struggling with controlling their temper or their emotions, or even short-term memory loss is a big, can be a symptom of a brain injury. Chronic pain, that's another one that, again, on the outside, somebody looks very typically healthy, but they may be suffering, and it could affect their work. And then, of course, we have people who may struggle to hear or see. They have low vision or are hard of hearing. Oftentimes, they may utilize glasses or they might utilize a hearing aid, but that doesn't always make them be able to work effectively depending on the type of environment that they're in, and so that can also be a barrier. So some statistics about disabilities, it's very common. You can see 56.7 million people in the United States have a disability. That's 19% of our population. And in caregiving, there are 39.8, almost 40 million caregivers that are providing care to an adult. This doesn't include people who are providing care to a child with a disability. This is just caring for an adult. And when we think about that working age, ages 18 to 64, that's our target audience for employers. They're wanting those people coming into our workforce. And half of that 56 million people are in that working age range. The employment rates for people with disabilities all over the board, it really depends on the state. It's anywhere between 24% and 53% of people with disabilities have a job and are employed. The unfortunate thing about that number is those people that have disabilities that are working, their median income is a little less than $10,000 a year. So they are not working full-time. I assume that they are potentially having assistance through other programming to help them live, or they may be using governmental resources, but because of their disability, they're not pulling in full-time work.
I have a question there. Has there been any research to show that these individuals are also underemployed and not able to really reach their full career potential just because of maybe stereotypes or perceptions that individuals have of their disability?
That's a great question. I don't have any numbers or statistics in front of me, but that is something that we do see at Easter Seals is we have, and we do provide job development and job placement for people with disabilities in the community, and we do see people who have the potential to work, who maybe employers aren't sure how they fit into their culture and how they can fit into their environment. So there are resources out there for people with disabilities. Easter Seals is one provider that can help provide accommodations and job coaching for employers who are interested in employing people who do have disabilities. I absolutely think that there's probably great statistics on that. Unfortunately, I don't have any in front of me, but I can see if I can find some and send them to the partnership and they can get them out. 30% of people with disabilities do live in poverty. The ones that are in that working age range, 18 to 64, again, could be underemployed, could be unemployed, or could just be not at a point in their disability where they are able to accommodate working in maybe the environment that they want to work in. So I have a couple questions. First question is a guess for our audience here. What state has the least amount of people with disabilities that are residents of that state? If anybody wants to guess. It's not Iowa. Well, the answer is Utah. And Utah doesn't have a huge population, but they definitely have the least amount of people with disabilities that are living in that state. Not sure why that is, but the next question I have is the state that has the most people with disabilities living in its state, and that is West Virginia. That's very interesting because West Virginia is a really small state. But a lot of the states that have a higher percentage of people with disabilities living in it are really in the southern United States, or kind of on the East Coast, the southern part of the East Coast. You do see higher amounts of people with disabilities living in that area. Iowa, about 12.9% of our population has a diagnosed disability, which is very interesting. We fall right about in the middle of the states. We're on the lower end of the middle of people that live in our state that have a disability. So Iowa does have a large aging population, and the older you get, the more likely it is that you'll be diagnosed with a disability. Now this kind of transitions us into caregiving and people who are caring for a loved one, especially a parent. And you can see the older you get, the more likely it is that you will be diagnosed with a disability, and that means for our 18 to 24-year-olds, or I'm sorry, 18 to 64-year-olds, they are eventually going to be caregivers and making decisions for their aging parents. They may not financially, parents that are aging or people who have been diagnosed with a disability, they may not have the financial resources to live the quality of life that they'd like to live, or maybe they were living prior to having a disability. Assisted living or residential care facilities, even nursing homes are very expensive to live in, and a lot of times that financial burden can fall on the caregiver. The insurance system is very hard to navigate. Medicaid, Medicare, it's not cut and dry. It can be very overwhelming and confusing. And when somebody all of a sudden is tasked with taking care of their loved one with a disability, not only are they caring for somebody who now has potentially medical needs that they're not familiar with, but also a whole new world of insurance and resources out there that they're not aware of, which can definitely cause stress and anxiety for those caregivers, and it will affect their work as well. So some caregiver statistics in the United States. Nearly 40 million of Americans have provided unpaid care to an adult in the last year. So we talked about this number before of people with disabilities being cared for by a loved one, and this is in addition to them working full-time, taking care of their families, and it definitely can create compassion fatigue for those folks that are caring for their loved one with a disability. 40% of caregivers are male. So that means it's split pretty close, whether it's a loved one that's a male or a female taking care of their loved one with a disability. And nearly 1 in 10 caregivers is 75 years old or older, which is very interesting as well, an older population taking care of somebody that does have a disability. The average amount of caregiving hours that are spent each week would be 44.6 hours a week. So if you're working 40 hours or more at your full-time employment and you're going home and you're working another full-time job as a caregiver, without breaks, without a respite, without a babysitter, without somebody to stay with your loved one, that can be very draining. It can cause a lot of health issues for the caregiver as well. And then 40% of caregivers, there was a report done by the National Alliance of Caregiving, and they surveyed caregivers all over the United States. It was a wonderful survey. It's really great information. And those caregivers said that, they're wielding a high burden of care for their loved one. They are doing nursing, skilled nursing tasks on their loved one when they don't have any kind of education or training in that area. So all of a sudden they are assisting with all sorts of medical devices, breathing treatments, medication, things that they haven't been familiar with in the past. And when asked in that survey if those loved ones had a choice in taking on their caregiver role, half of the respondents said no. So a lot of times that can be because the disability happened instantly. So there was an accident or an injury that happened to their loved one that now all of a sudden they're diagnosed with a disability, and so they are forced to take on caregiving. Or maybe their loved one or their parents, they're the ones that live closest to that family, or their siblings aren't able to assist. And so they've been kind of volunteered for the job, so to say. And these stats I don't have up there, but some additional stats I thought were really interesting. 47% of working caregivers have indicated that their caregiving expenses have caused them to use up all or most of their savings. So again, the financial burden of caring for somebody is so expensive that they've used up their nest eggs to take care of their loved ones, and that would certainly cause stress that would roll over into the workplace. 50% of employed female caregivers over 50 years old have reported symptoms of depression because of their caregiving. So now their mental health has suffered because of the added responsibility of caring for another person. 73% of caregivers who cared for somebody else continue to work while they care for their loved one. 66% had to make an adjustment to their work life, whether that means they had to be late to work or give up work. And then 1 in 5 caregivers have to take a leave of absence at some point to care for their loved one. 64% of working parents that have a child with a special need or a disability have reported that the caregiving responsibility has negatively impacted their work performance. Disabilities don't work on a clock, and so sometimes people need medication in the middle of the day, or their appointments are between 8 and 5, which is typically where most Americans are working their hours. And so it could impact their work because of chronic absenteeism. Other ways that this can affect their work would be they start to lose attention to detail because they're tired, they don't sleep, they're caring for somebody else in the times that most of us are getting a chance to decompress and relax from work. There's really no downtime. Caregivers become socially separated from others. It's difficult to make friends when you know you can't see them outside of work hours, or you know you have to have your phone on all the time and you're constantly leaving work to take care of somebody or take them to an appointment. Their lack of basic needs aren't met, so they can't meet the needs of others. And that's something we talk about at Easter Seals, is we always tell our team members to take care of themselves first, because you can't take care of somebody else until you take care of yourself. And caregivers are often putting themselves last. They're caring for their loved one, they're caring for their family, and then they care for themselves at the end. On the outside, people who may not be aware that somebody is a caregiver, they may think that they're lazy or unmotivated. They might think they're not willing to work hard. They don't take on extra projects. They don't stay late. They don't come early. They don't work through their lunch. And from the outside, that's an easy thing. And not knowing that somebody is caring for a loved one outside of their work hours, it often can create some problems at work. Caregivers oftentimes will have disciplinary action their performance because they're having to leave work. Maybe their work's not getting done, or it's not getting done to the caliber that it needs to be. And when we switch back to people that might have a disability who are working in your workplace, oftentimes others don't know, especially if it's an invisible disability like we had talked about before. Others will think that they're lazy or unmotivated. They'll quote unquote say they look healthy, so they must be faking whatever it is that's going on. So that's something you hear quite a bit. People don't often understand things that aren't happening to them, or they're not directly affected by it. People will have a hard time understanding the limitations of a person. So for example, if you have a team member that you work with and he's a big guy, looks super strong, and you're moving office furniture, you're moving things around, and you might volunteer him to help, he might have a chronic back pain injury, or he may have a disability that doesn't allow him to be able to do that. But because on the outside he appears to be somebody who should be strong and able-bodied, oftentimes people think that they don't want to be a team player, or they're lazy and they don't feel like helping. Some other caregiver statistics, daycare, babysitters, or someone to stay with their loved one, a caregiver that they can hire, is very expensive. It's also hard to find someone that you may trust to stay with your loved one while you're gone. There's something called compassion fatigue, and that's a burnout that you would receive from caring for other people. We see it a lot in our nonprofit world when we're caring for people with disabilities, is you spend a lot of emotional energy caring for another person, that you're burnt out and you are tired, and it's hard for you to produce results in any aspect of your life. So what do you do if you want to hire somebody that shares with you that they have a disability? What can you do? And then what do you do if you find out that you have an employee who is caring for somebody with a disability? What can we do to accommodate these team members and keep them employed? We know that working brings value to people's lives, and so we want to keep them employed and provide an environment for them that makes that successful. So the first thing I would think of when you have somebody that has a disability or has shared with you that they're caring for somebody would be find out what accommodations they need to be successful at work. And we're going to talk about some of those in a little bit here. You can also create an inclusive environment. So find out what are their barriers. You know, does it take them 20 minutes to get from their car to the parking lot because they have to park in the back? Can we make an accommodation for them? That's an easy thing. If we put their desk closer to the restroom so that it doesn't take them as long to get there and back. We can use person-first language, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Having the right attitude, so the willingness to work with a person, that attitude will spread to the rest of the department. And then, of course, making the commitment to make the environment successful for everybody, including it not impacting your work, but also for the team members around them. So a little Caregiving 101. What can you do at work to make this an inclusive environment for your caregivers? And that survey that I had talked to you about earlier from the National Alliance on Caregiving, it was done in June in 2014. 66% of those caregivers had reported that they were employed in the last 5 years. And again, half of them had changed their schedules to provide care for somebody else. A big percentage of them ended up working fewer hours than they normally wanted to. Out of all of those people, half of the people said they had to quit their job because their employer was not flexible enough to allow them to work and provide care at the same time. So in the survey, they asked caregivers, what can employers do to better support them and make them more comfortable at work? And the respondents said things like, don't imply that childcare is more important than adult care. And that's a big one. All employers, especially large companies, will offer discounts on childcare or extended hours in their childcare to accommodate people's work schedules. You can use flex spending accounts and things like that to pay for your childcare. But we need the same options for caregivers who are caring for adults. So that would definitely be an option there. Sharing corporate policies on elder care and being more accepting of requests for time off on short notice. That's not always something that you can accommodate, but if you know somebody is a caregiver and may need to leave at a moment's notice, they can have a backup plan or a succession plan in place so that their job continues while they're gone. And then again, designing a policy that accommodates caregiving responsibilities without penalizing the employees, such as maybe not using vacation time to provide care for another, making sure that they have access to FMLA, or they can use their sick time or other benefit time, or even working a flexible work schedule to make up for that time later. Another resource out there would be employee assistant programs. That's available and can help caregivers find other resources out there, and also to help them cope with stress. A lot of times those EAP programs will have free counseling or support groups that people can go to, and they can get assistance from others who are going through the same thing. Flexible use of benefit time, we talked about that before. And we also talked about the discounted home care through a specific vendor for caregivers. So there's lots of home companion services out there. There's visiting nurses services, working out something with that company where they can get a discount through the employer so that they could hire somebody to be with their loved one while they're at work. That would ensure that that person can come to work every day on time, and they know that their caregiver is being taken care of while they're gone, or the person they're caring for is being taken care of while they're gone. Another great option you could do is you could bring in a Medicaid or Medicare insurance expert to come in and help your caregivers navigate the system. I work in the Medicaid system, and it's confusing, and I've done it for a long time. So imagine being thrown into this whole new healthcare system, different forms, different funders, different providers you're working with that you don't know anything about, and bringing somebody in, you know, maybe once a quarter or once a year to help them with that enrollment, or a number that they can call and they can talk to somebody about benefits for their loved one, so that way they're getting full access to the resources that are available to that person with a disability. And there are a ton of resources out there. It's just really not knowing. If you don't know where to find them, it can be very difficult and also overwhelming for somebody who's working full-time and trying to navigate the system. And then technology from home or mobile devices. How great is it that everything now can be web-based? So moving your SharePoint intranet to a web-based version, or your databases to a web-based version, or allowing VPN access for people so that they can work from anywhere and continue to be productive. Many times they're sitting in lobbies with their loved one who's going to doctor's appointments, and they could sit there and get some work done. And so having your technology mobile would be crucial for a productive environment for your caregivers. So we talked a little bit, I mentioned person-first language, and this is something you can do for, really it's great for everybody in your workforce, but it's definitely great for somebody that works for you that may have disclosed that they have a disability, or for your caregivers as well. And so person-first language is exactly what it sounds like. The person is first and the disability is second. For example, Joe is your administrative assistant. He's a person that utilizes a wheelchair. Sally works in your mailroom and she's hard of hearing and uses an interpreter to communicate. Mike works in the cafeteria and has a learning disability, so his manager reads aloud all the instructions so that he can understand. We work really hard at Easter Seals to make sure we know the person and not the disability. Your disability doesn't define you. And oftentimes when you do have a disability, you spend a lot of your time talking about it and talking about the things that you cannot do. And what we like to do is we want to focus on the person and the things that they can do. We all have limitations, whether we have a diagnosed disability or not. So we spend a lot of time finding out what we're good at and then focusing on that at work. You can do the same thing for a person who's disclosed a disability. What are you good at? What can we do? And I'm going to make sure that you are the person and that your disability will come second. If you never know what to say, you can always ask. People that have disabilities or caregivers of a loved one with a disability, they're happy to tell you what's the right terminology. We all know it changes all the time and you don't want to be offensive, so just ask if you don't know. So we're going to move on to technology and accommodations. There are literally thousands upon thousands of reasonable accommodations that can be made, and assistive technology that you can try with somebody with a disability, or you can even share with your caregivers who may need this at home as well. I have a couple pictures here, and I'm going to show you a couple other slides that have other examples of assistive technology or accommodations that you can make. You can see in that first picture we have somebody utilizing a wheelchair. So they're at a table where their wheelchair fits underneath the table. Seems pretty common sense, but you'd be surprised once you get out in the community with somebody who utilizes a wheelchair how difficult it can be to just sit at a table if the table isn't accessible for them. That middle picture, that is a reacher. So if you have somebody who has low back pain or arm pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, and they need to be able to grab things high or low, and this could be a problem for them based off of their ambulatory needs, they could use a reacher, which there's all different kinds, but this can pick an item up off the floor or off a shelf and bring it down to them. And then that last picture you see is somebody utilizing a working dog. Or a therapy dog. This could be for somebody who has a seizure disorder. There are dogs that can notify their owner if a seizure is coming. So this allows the person to be in a safe space, sitting down, where they can't fall backwards or hurt themselves, and they can prepare or take their medication that they need for that. The next slide here is a couple other accommodations that are out there. The first in the upper left-hand corner would be a screen enlarger. So if you have somebody who has low vision or struggles to see things, and I do, I have to wear glasses sometimes, but for our folks that have a disability, there is software out there that'll help them zoom in or enlarge it to the size that they need so they're able to read things on the internet. The next picture over is we have somebody who appears to not have use of their eyes, and so somebody is reading them something at work. So this is a great accommodation, not only for somebody that has a visual impairment, but also someone with a learning disability. We all learn different. Adult learning is tons of research out there. Some people are visual, some people are audio learners, and if you have somebody that struggles to read, maybe they have dyslexia, and their words get switched around, the letters get switched around, it makes it difficult for them to have good reading comprehension. So reading aloud oftentimes will solve this issue for people. The lower left-hand corner, we have somebody utilizing an online language interpreter. That's an awesome resource that's available. So if you need to have a conversation with somebody, they can set up a webcam and you have somebody to interpret right there. And then the last one I think is really cool. This is one of many. This is a mouse for a computer, and this would be for somebody that has maybe has arthritis or carpal tunnel or limited grip strength. They can utilize a mouse on their computer that fits their hand and their grip strength. And there are so many different kinds to try for all different types of dexterity needs, which is really cool. And it fits into all computers. You just plug it in just like a normal mouse. The next slide up in the top corner, this would be an accommodation or assistive technology for somebody that, again, may have some dexterity needs in their hands. They can type with this, and I've seen people use them, and they can type really fast once they get the hang of it. So they're back up utilizing the computer just as they would if they didn't have that dexterity issue or limited mobility with their hand. The next picture over is somebody who's wearing headphones. We have people that work in our community settings that have sensory issues or can't focus because of noise around them. So noise-canceling headphones is a great thing if you have that type of work environment where somebody can do that, or they can listen to white noise or low background music to help them concentrate on the computer. The bottom left-hand corner, we have somebody who drives for work, but again may have some dexterity issues with their hands, and so this is something that helps them steer the steering wheel. Again, all different kinds of options out there for people with limited dexterity. The last picture there, you can see somebody opening the door with a key holder. Again, fine motor skills. If somebody can't grip or pinch, there are things out there to make them be able to live independently, work independently, and do their tasks at work without any undue hardship to the employer. So we're going to go to some really basic disability etiquette, things that we all should know, and it'll just make life and work life more comfortable and inclusive for your team members. First thing is disability news is not your news to share. If somebody discloses to you that they have disability, we all know that that's not something you can share with the rest of the team. It is totally up to them if they want to share that they have a disability or they are caring for somebody with a disability. Details need to be shared by the person that owns that. The second thing would be is people with disabilities, they want to blend in just like everybody else. So they don't want it to be super obvious that we're installing Joe's new desk today because Joe uses a wheelchair and can't fit under the old one. You know, we don't need to say things like that. They just want to blend in like everybody else. Wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, any kind of assistive technology, consider that an extension of somebody's body. So if you're pushing somebody in a wheelchair, it's not okay for you to hang your purse off the back. It's not okay for you to lean on it if you're tired. It's also not okay for you to start pushing somebody in a wheelchair without asking them first. So consider that as part of their body. We don't touch it, we don't use it without asking first. And it's okay to offer, hey, would you like me to push you? And that person will be able to tell you yes or no. The fourth thing is it's okay to ask somebody to repeat themselves if you don't understand them. So if they told you something you don't understand, or maybe they have a speech impairment that makes it difficult for them to be understood, ask them again. That's okay. There's nothing offensive about that. The fifth one is to not speak loudly or slowly. So many times if you are working with somebody who may have a hearing impairment, you'll notice people will talk very slow and very loud, and that actually makes it more difficult for our deaf community or our hearing impaired community. A lot of people that have a hearing impairment can read lips, but they learn to read lips by like watching people have normal conversation. So when you slow it down and speak very loudly, it's actually more difficult for them to understand you. The sixth one is to get on their eye level. What I mean by that is if you have somebody that can't stand or has to sit or utilizes a wheelchair, and you're going to have a long conversation with them, sit down next to them. Have that conversation eye to eye so it's more comfortable for everybody. The seventh one, I said this before, to ask before helping. Of course, if somebody is fallen down, we want you to help them, but always ask before saying, hey, can I carry that for you, or can I push your chair and make this easier for you? Always ask. And then the last one is to be age appropriate. So if you have a person working in your workplace who may be caring for a child or an adult that may have an intellectual disability or may have autism or Down syndrome, we're going to treat them like the age that they are. So it's okay to ask how old are they and what are their interests, what do they like. They may like things that aren't age appropriate. We probably like things that aren't age appropriate, but we're going to pretend like they're, you know, we're going to treat them the way that the age that they are. So adults don't color. Well, I guess adult coloring classes are kind of hot right now, but they draw, they use colored pencils, they use things like that. And so we're going to use more age appropriate terminology with those folks. So a couple tips when you have team members that might have specific and common disabilities in your workplace that they've disclosed to you or you just noticed. So a short attention span. I think a lot of us have that, but there are people that truly have attention deficit disorder or attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, ADD or ADHD, very common. And along with that, of course, having a short attention span. So short sentences, maintain eye contact, and ask them to repeat what you said. Now, this works for like all people, regardless if they have a disability or not, but this is the best way to make sure that that person has heard what you said and your message has gotten across to them. Great tasks for people with a short attention span, any kind of busy or active job or job where they can talk a lot, or wear headphones so that they can focus on what they're doing. Quick deadlines are best for these people. Make sure you give them due dates. And then also find out what their strengths are and make sure they're in the right job. Next would be somebody with a visual impairment. So this could be someone who is completely blind or someone who just has low vision. Always identify who you are at the beginning of your conversation. After a while, they'll get to know you by your voice and you know, if other things that they get familiar with your how you talk and your tone of your voice. But identify who you are when you're talking to them and let them know if you're leaving or the conversation has ended or somebody else has joined the conversation. Let them know, hey, John just joined our conversation. And then ask if they want verbal cues if you're walking together. What I mean by this is if you're walking down the sidewalk downtown and you're getting ready to go up the stairs to the parking ramp, say, okay, we're about 5 feet away from the entrance and it's a set of stairs, and then giving them visual cues, verbal cues, so that they know what's ahead of them and they can walk with you. There's also a really great, for those people that may struggle with reading a computer screen, there are dictation softwares out there that will read your computer screen to you. There's also software that will put your computer screen into quadrants, and so they can use verbal cues on their computer to click different parts of the screen so that they can utilize the computer and manage websites and things like that, even if they're not able to see the actual website. The next, if you have somebody in your workplace who has disclosed that they have a mental illness, since there's such a variety and every single person's diagnosis and symptoms will be different, just make sure that you make eye contact and you're aware of your body language, and be patient and understanding with that person. It doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to hear you or understand you, and it doesn't mean that that person will behave inappropriately. There are mental illnesses so common these days, and there's so many different kinds, and people will go through cycles of times where they may be sick and times where they may be well. And so assuming they're well unless they've told you otherwise. Next is, if I can turn my page here, is hearing loss. So if you have somebody who is deaf or has hearing loss or struggles to hear, maybe they have a high-pitched noise in their hearing, and so they struggle to hear different pitches of voices, always look that person directly in the face, and then keep your mouth and your face free of your hands and shadows. So be cognitive of where you're sitting during a meeting. If there's a lot of light, like if you're sitting in front of a window and you're shadowed, they can't see your face, it would be difficult for them to read your lips or watch you talk so that they can understand what you're saying. Again, don't speak slowly or have exaggerated facial expressions. Just speak clearly, and if they don't understand, they'll ask you again. Next is a speech disability, and this can be somebody who may just be difficult to understand, or maybe they struggle to control the tone or volume of their voice. And so if they're speaking with you, listen carefully and repeat what you heard them say so that that's an acknowledgement that you understand what they said. Don't pretend to understand if you didn't, and don't rush the conversation. It's very easy if you have somebody maybe that has a stutter to try to finish a sentence for them so that the conversation moves faster. And it's just best practice that you don't. Let them take their time to share with you what it is that they want to share, and don't interrupt. If you truly can't understand a person and they have the ability to do so, you can ask them to write it down, and then you can read what it is that they're trying to say. So some resources that are out there is for employers. If you have somebody who's a caregiver or someone that has a disability that works for you and they need some help, Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation, that is a state-funded service that's out there to help people find jobs, keep jobs, and have reasonable accommodations made at work. There's also job coaching through providers like Easter Seals, Iowa. This would be if you have somebody that's a client of our services and we've assisted them in placing them in employment at your work site, we can provide job coaching. And what that means is we send a trained staff member alongside that employee, and they go through your organization's new employee orientation. We read your policy manual. We're there learning the job alongside the client and making sure that they understand. And in this process, job coaches are great for helping clients understand some of those things that you may need to move through quickly, and we're there to coach them through it. We're also there to provide assistance to you and your team members. So if you have employees that aren't sure how this person is going to fit into their work site, our job coaches can provide training for your team members as well and get them on board with this. The next is JAN, or Job Accommodation Network. This is an awesome website. I think it's just jan.org, I believe. Oh, askjan.org. And this website is great because you can get free job accommodation assistance for somebody in your workforce. So if you have a small workforce and you're not ever dealt with having to make an accommodation for somebody with a disability or even a caregiver, this Jan can help find resources out there, state and local resources, and hook you up with someone that can help you, which is awesome. Of course, the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, if you want a little light reading, there's lots of information out there on the internet. You can look that up and read that Disability Act. And then at Easter Seals, Iowa, and at Camp Sunnyside, we have a lending center. And in our lending centers, we have all sorts of assistive technology that you can try. So remember those pictures I showed earlier that people were using a different mouse on their computer or typers or different grips for keys or driving. We have all of those devices that you can try before you buy. And it's a very low cost. I believe it's $35 a year, and if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But it's a very low fee, and you can borrow 5 items at a time and try them out. And then if you decide, yeah, this is going to work for my team member, or this is going to work for my loved one, or for me, we can help you find where you can purchase this item. Assistive technology typically isn't very expensive, but you don't want to buy 4 or 5 things when you can actually try it out first. So we literally have thousands of items you can borrow. And then again, the National Alliance for Caregiving, that's a great resource, lots of research out there, advocacy, state and local coalitions, and ideas for employers so they can have a totally inclusive environment and keep those caregivers employed. So that's all I have. I have a nice quote at the end here. If we fail to support our caregivers, we put both the caregiver and the care recipient at risk. So if anybody has any questions, I would love to answer them for you as best I can.
While we wait for any questions to come in, I'll do a couple of general announcements. We do have 2 events upcoming. We have our multicultural reception on November 3rd, which is a Thursday, and that will include a career fair and also a diversity inclusion roundtable. So it's 3 events in one. You can register for that at DesMoinesMetro.com/events. The next day, we also have one of our biggest events of the year, is the 4th Annual Executive Forum on Diversity and Inclusion. We will be having a keynote presentation from John Forsyth and Rana Baranobis of Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. We will have a follow-up from last year's race relations and the work that the partnership has been doing. We will have one about communicating conversations. And then we will actually end the day with some small group conversations and focus groups dealing with what we're calling untapped treasures in the workforce. And the disability workforce will be one of those focus groups, as well as prior offenders, the homeless. We have 5 different, and they're just not coming to me right now. I haven't had enough coffee, I guess. So definitely a great opportunity there to engage and to push your internal diversity inclusion programming even further than what it may be today, and to also help others with your best practices as well in those open conversations. I'm not seeing any questions coming in. What I will do is I'll go ahead and end the call. However, I will stay on the line for a couple more minutes just in case if some chats do come through, and we will go ahead and get those answered for you. But I definitely want to thank you for your time. We'll keep you informed of upcoming sessions that we will be having for the diversity inclusion webinars. And again, thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. Have a great day.